Florida has a lot of freshwater bodies, lakes, springs, and there is a growing concern about the water quality because all these nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, they can create water quality issues because of eutrophication. And to mitigate those, the BMPs were introduced. So BMPs were introduced almost 3 decades ago in the state of Florida, but in 2020 they were kind of adopted as a policy or a regulatory numbers.
Welcome to the Crop Science Podcast Show by Wisenetics. I'm your host, Leo Bastos, Assistant Professor in Integrative Precision Agriculture at the University of Georgia. Today, we welcome our guest, Dr. Lakesh Sharma. He is an Assistant Professor of Soil Fertility and Sustainable Agriculture at the University of Florida in Gainesville. Lakesh, welcome to the Crop Science Podcast Show. It's really great to have you here with us today. And I wanted to ask if you can share with us a little bit about your path and how you got to the position you have today, and also a little bit about your current projects.
Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be here. Alrighty, so I'm originally from northwest part of India, and I did my graduation in agriculture up in India, as well as my master's. From Punjab Agriculture University. My bachelor is from Guru Nanak Dev Agriculture University, Amritsar. So I had a bachelor in agriculture, but a master's in horticulture, and I worked on citrus nutrient management, and then after that, I kind of survived as a research assistant for 2.5 years. Back in India, and then came to North Dakota State University for my PhD. I did my PhD in nutrient management in corn, specific to nitrogen, and developed an algorithm related to using an NDVI sensor, predicting crop yield and determining, or we can call it estimating nitrogen requirement for corn. My professor there was Dr. Dave Franzen. He's a renowned extension soil specialist, almost kind of, I think he's retiring on August 2nd next month. I wish I'll be there. So after that, finishing my PhD in 2014, I joined him a postdoc for a year and then joined as an assistant professor in University of Maine Cooperative Extension. There, I worked on potatoes for 4 years. I was involved in developing nitrogen and phosphorus recommendations for potatoes. Before I left in 2019, I gave some guidelines related to nitrogen and phosphorus. And then in 2019, I joined University of Florida, pretty much with the same position profile, almost the same title, actually, in Gainesville. So in Gainesville, I'm working since 2019 and on multiple crops, including potatoes, corn, hemp, and cotton. More likely, I would say right now I'm working on corn, hemp, and potatoes because cotton is more on the north Florida commodity, and I have a collaboration with Dr. Hardeep Singh. He is working on cotton. Before he joined, I wrote a project, and there wasn't anybody there, so that project we're kind of working together on it. My role is here to develop and update best management practices related to nutrient management. And those practices, once they are tested in the field and they are economically and technically viable and practical for farmers to use, are reviewed by the university. There's a body called PNOC, PNOC, Plant Nutrition Oversight Committee, where most of the administrators are reviewing my work, and I present my work there. And after that, they, depending on the research and their perspective on it, they either approve or ask for more details on the research. And once that is approved, if it is approved, then that goes to Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services for adoption. Um, my position is very impactful in a way that the nutrient management recommendation, if I develop any, would be a regulatory number. So in Florida in 2020, there was a bill that was passed called Senta Bill 712, which regulated all the nutrient management in the state of Florida. So our land grant institutions are developing the nutrient recommendations from hundreds of more than 100 years now. So, but University of Florida is the only university where the nutrient recommendation is now a regulatory number. So, my role is to update them according to the current situations and management practices, and make sure that our agriculture stakeholders are viable, and they are and agriculture is sustainable for them to follow.
That is really, really fantastic. I I was particularly not aware that that's how it worked in Florida. And as you mentioned, I don't think it is common for university nutrient recommendations to go all the way and become policy, right? So I think it's a really interesting point that you explained there. And I want to, I want to follow up on that actually, because it's such a unique situation that it is also so interesting. We know that when policy comes, especially for nutrient management, it's probably because there has been problems in the past that cause some larger problem that now we need to fix and address. I guess, can you comment more on that specificity of Florida? Like, what are the nutrient related problems that happen in Florida, and also how do growers receive that policy level of nutrient management recommendations?
Of course. So Florida has a lot of freshwater bodies, lakes, springs, and there is a growing concern about the water quality because all these nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, they can create water quality issues because of eutrophication. And to mitigate those, the BMPs were introduced. So BMPs were introduced almost 3 decades ago in the state of Florida, but in 2020 they were kind of adopted as a policy or a regulatory numbers. So water quality is the priority for the state of Florida, and there are two main uh, uh, contributors: urban side and the agriculture side. And obviously the when the when this policy was made and this bill was introduced, the none of the stakeholder was actually prepared for it. So not even the university was ready uh, to be seen as somebody who is creating a recommendation. Most of the recommendations are more as a suggestions. They were never seen as a regulatory number. So if you see around all the land grant institutions, the nutrient is a recommendation. It's not a number that your producer has to follow. But now, since we are in that shoes, and our recommendation, we looked into the detail of how they are. We found that most of these recommendations are decades old. I give you an example of cotton and corn. These are probably more than 3 decades old recommendations. And these recommendations were developed when obviously the genetics was not that improved. We have new technology. Just giving a ballpark of plant population that was used 30 years ago was around between 20 to 25,000 plants per acre in corn, and right now it's around between 32 to 36,000 plants per acre. So it's a huge number change. Plus, we have a new genetics that is high producing, So we do need more nutrients. But our recommendations were old, and since farmers has to follow that recommendation, it was a kind of a state of urgency on our part to update the recommendation and not to compromise any research, because when you are in the rush, you have always a chance uh, to go something wrong. So we also need to come up with a robust data set to update the recommendation, which we are in a phase of developing recommendations. Florida has developed first recommendation for potatoes nitrogen requirement, and because of the different commodities in chip or a fresh market potatoes, we have a range of nitrogen now between 200 to 250 pounds of nitrogen. So there is not a one number. So it gives a flexibility to farmers um, to adjust their nitrogen requirement depending on their yield potential, as well as what their purpose for potatoes in terms of chip potato or a fresh market potato.
Absolutely. And can you comment a little bit on? So you said that when the recommendations became policy, that growers maybe were not ready for that. So how was what was their perception and their response to when these became policy?
So I would give a big credit to the farmers here, because most of the farmers were using a BMP. Obviously, not all of them are maybe in compliance, but in some form they were using a BMPs. And since every farm is different and they use different management practices, not all the BMPs could be follows exactly the same way that a farmer A is following, then obviously the farmer B is doing a little bit of modification in those BMPs. But most of them were aware about the BMPs, I would say. However, because these recommendations were not up to date, that was something they did not know how to react to it. So there was a discussion. So most of the extension personnels like me were in touch with the stakeholders. I do have three committees, I call it. I have a corn committee, cotton committee, and a potato committee, which basically works with me closely to design and an experiment for nitrogen rate studies. And then they are involved every step of it, including how the nitrogen was applied, because in Florida the soils are sandy, so nothing stays on the top. Everything just leaches down quickly if it is a leachable nutrient, and nitrogen is a very leaching prone nutrient. Um, so as I said, the farmers were doing many things typically to improve their farming practices before implementation. The only part that they were kind of blindsided was that now they have to follow the number, which is almost 3 4 decades old. And so we are in continuous conversation with them, and helping them understand how to improve that recommendation. And we possibly in the next couple of years will come up with new recommendation for major commodities in Florida. So I would also kind of emphasize here that it's not a researcher's fault that these recommendations were old. There was not there was no funding available for those kind of research, because USDA or national funding agencies, they usually focus more on the innovative part. These are the sciences or the research that is very conventional, and there is may not be a huge innovative a point, but this is more like a necessity. It's not like you are buying a new car every time, that okay, if it's not a new car, then I'm not buying it. Because you need from point A to point B every time you go to office, you need a car. So this is a research that we need. It's a necessity, not an option. So there is a lot of funding after this bill. A lot of funding was made available to researchers like me. There is a special legislative budget that comes to University of Florida to just develop nutrient recommendations. There is a state funding from Florida Department of Agriculture, Consumer Services, Office of Water Ag Policy. There is a separate branch that provides funding for nutrient management. So a lot of funds came together to work to basically engage all the researchers to update the recommendations. So we are in that phase. So it is just one of the factor I would say that we are addressing, which is the rate. But there are other factors that, if I may elaborate, like we call it as a 4R, but in Florida it's a 5 hours. The 4 hours is right rate, right method, right source, and uh,
Replacement.
right placement. Yes, exactly. Thank you. And then the fifth R is right irrigation. So because Florida is a state where the soils are sandy and weather is very supportive. It's a tropical weather. We need a lot of irrigation for our crop production. And if the irrigation is not optimized, then the chances of those nutrients to be leached down are very, very high. So I would say wherever there is an irrigation opportunity, there are 5 hours, not 4 hours. Um, so our rate is only one part of it. Now we are some of the commodities where the rate is already optimized. We are moving forward with the right time, method, and placement. And after that, we are also using soil moisture sensors to optimize our irrigation requirement for each crop. So now the when we say nutrient management, it won't be a single rate that will be asked by the agencies for the farmers to adopt. There will be a combination of practices that need to be followed. This is actually a definition from FDAX, anyways. That's the BMPs are combination, not a single practice. But any rate recommendation will be a combination of many factors that will require, a certain soil moisture sensor implementation and a right method, right source, kind of a mix of practices to adopt a certain rates.
Absolutely. And something that I wanna follow up that relates back to your to some of the work that you said you did in the past and perhaps you're still doing, but for nutrients and inputs like nitrogen and water, which are so dynamic and it can vary so much, both the demand and also the loss potential from year to year, from site to site, creating policies around those seems like could be highly variable. The range of potential values that could be optimum is so variable. So have you been doing any work on using sensors to actually determine that best management practice for that field that year, rather than just using averages of other sites and years?
Yes, we are using some precision ag tools. We do have NDVI sensors that has proven successful, especially in the Midwestern states. A lot of NDVI sensor being used and proven that they can predict the yield and estimate the nitrogen requirement. We are using some drone imageries, hyperspectral, multispectral sensors. We are also using spectrometers, Lycors. We have a handheld Lycor and a full, bigger model of Lycor. I think it's 6800. So we are using some precision ag tools to predict the nitrogen requirement. But I would say because they are not user friendly, and if if there is a company that could deliver, process all that data and can deliver nutrient recommendation to the grower, probably the best case scenario. But we do not have that um, facility present at this point of time. I have seen some companies that are doing work using NDVI sensors and working with the farmers. They are mostly scouting the fields and figuring out the problem areas, because scouting a field is obviously a labor-intensive work. So using a drone is more convenient and easy to use. So we have reached to a point where we are just finding problem areas. We are not able to um, process all the data that comes out of those drones and sensors and get back to the farmer and say, okay, if I did the work today, probably by tomorrow the farmer need a recommendation. But that's not happening, and uh, we need to get there. If we need a little more improvement in our nutrient use efficiencies, reaching from following all these practices, we can reach to a certain point where I have concluded if we use like 8 different splits of nitrogen application in corn, we can reach to nitrogen use efficiency of 65%. And but if we want to go beyond it, we need too many efforts or efforts that are practically possible. So we need maybe a private industry to put more efforts to it. And the farmers, I can tell the farmers will be more than happy to get their services, because agriculture is seen as uh, not a high profitable market. Uh, uh, there are um, there are companies that probably not highly excited or very excited to get into this part. But moving forward, we need that. And University of Florida has started a new initiative, artificial intelligence, and I am working with the department to implement some of my data using conventional approaches and also AI approaches to make some more sense and more robust modeling for predicting nutrient for the crops.
Absolutely. And the next one that I want to ask you here is, um, especially, and this is such an interesting case to think about, given that Florida has recommendations turning to policy, um, as we're seeing, more extreme events are happening more frequently, right? So it's both in both ends, especially of water availability. So either too dry or either too wet, too much rain. Um, and given that these are now not simply recommendations, but they have to be implemented following a policy procedure, how are growers, and well, how are you as a researcher developing recommendations that perhaps can be more adaptable given these extreme events becoming more common, and how are farmers adopting that to be more resilient as well?
Good question. Yes, we do have odd years or years where we can't predict the weather. So I can give you an example. I started a new nitrogen rate study in corn in 2022, and the average rain from planting to after 2 months, around we have a planting time of March, early March to late March, and then till May 15th, we had around 5 inches of rain, roughly, in 2022 and 2023. In 2024, we have around 13 and a half inch of rain within the same period. So it's almost 3 times. So we do have a leaching rain events that happened. And the leaching rain event is where you have more than 3 inches of rain in certain period or certain days. And in those days, we have given a farmer an opportunity to apply 30 more pounds of nitrogen, because the nitrogen that was there leached down, and we have seen it. Like in the data, we have seen the nitrogen was there, and it's after the rain, it's not there. So we have given a wiggle room for the growers to use extra nitrogen. And when we're developing the recommendation, we will keep this year in mind. So if the leaching rain event happens, what you can do. So our approach right now is to calculate the nitrogen, pounds of nitrogen required per bushel of corn, which is very typical in the southern states, and University of Georgia has the same approach. It's a yield-based approach, and that's what we are doing here. That's pretty much used everywhere in around the nation and around the world. But there are certain other precision ag tools that you can use to improvise this technique, like using an NDVI sensor, and you can see whether you are getting to a certain yield potential. So yield-based approaches, once you have the numbers, required amount of nitrogen per bushel of corn, then you can, depending on the rain event, you can adjust it. So we also giving a farmer an opportunity to treat their farms separately. So each farmer has, not a one parcel. They have several different parcels of land that they work with, and each parcel has a different yield potential. So we are asking them to record the yield from last 5 years, do an average, and then see what is your yield potential from each farm, and treat your each farm separately, because now you have the number. You know how many pounds of nitrogen required per bushels. So if your parcel A needs 200, produces 200 bushels of corn, and that needs X amount, then your parcel B may be producing more, and then you need a B amount of nitrogen. So that would be more like a site-specific nutrient recommendation for the growers, and that's where we are moving forward as a university. We are considering site-specific nutrient recommendation using some of the advanced tools, and obviously the irrigation part.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, if you're listening to this episode and you're enjoying this conversation as much as I am, we ask that you like this episode, follow us, and also share not only this episode but others with people that you think may also enjoy hearing these ideas.
It's time for our famous three. Explore the future of agriculture with KWS, a global leader in innovation and sustainable farming practices. Uncover the exceptional qualities of our hybrid rye, cultivating a legacy for a greener tomorrow. Visit kws.com/US for more information and for dealer locations. KWS, seeding the future since 1856.
All right, Lakesh. So now we're getting towards the three final questions that we ask every guest. So the first one here is going to be, what is your favorite resource in the technical side, so on the crop and soils and nutrient side, that you would like to share with our audience?
All right, Leo. I think I have a 70% extension and 30% research. So, but most of I do a lot of research projects, but most of my research projects are applied science. So if I found something today, they will be applicable tomorrow. So it's a very highly extension heavy projects. Um, my resource is conferences that I attend and extension meets. I do, if I pick one that kind of helped me a lot, is I would say Tri Society, that American Society of Agronomy, Soil Science Society of America, and Crop Science Society of America. The three societies usually meet once a year, typically end of the year, and I do talk a lot of my colleagues, and I see a lot of presentations, and that's kind of my to-go thing. But if some issues or something that I don't understand comes up to me, then obviously I Google it and find a research paper and find I don't I'm yeah. So these days, Google is your kind of best friend, everybody has the phone, and you can access that and find the answers to your questions quickly.
That's right. Perfect. And along those same lines, but on a different area, I guess, do you have any recommendations of a great resource outside of the technical side? So perhaps, something more on the personal development or anything else that would not necessarily be related to crop, soils, and nutrients.
If I would get a chance to go back and start my PhD again, I would have taken some psychology courses. so, so I would say it's very important for any profession to learn about psychology. And if you are in a position where your role can impact other people's life, I think psychology should be your something that you should consider. I don't want to recommend any book because there's tons of books that you can go online, and there are a lot of YouTube videos that you can access to. So I do have my book that I use, and so I would say, yeah, go and read psychology, how to interpret body languages, what to say, what not to say, those kind of things. If you are seeing yourself moving forward into a leadership role, I think that that's something people or young scientists can consider.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And our last question here is, throughout your career and experiences, what are the skills or skill set that you've realized that successful professionals consistently show?
I think perseverance and resilience. I would say several. These are these good words. A habit not to give up and be persuasive. Sometimes people do feel that you're very persuasive, but that's the nature of today's work. Everybody's busy, so you need to be persuasive to to do the work done. So and don't give up. There will be difficult times, and the favorite phrase from the movies or movie heroes is that this too shall pass. So everything gonna be not gonna be same. It will change. So just hang in there and do your work, and you will be recognized if you're looking for a recognition.
Perfect. All right. Well, that wraps up our episode for today. So, Lakesh, I really want to thank you for being with us. I really enjoyed our conversation. I learned a lot about, managing nutrients and the relationship between recommendations and policy in Florida. That was really, really interesting to hear your thoughts on that. So, thanks for being with us today, and have a good one.
Thank you.